Moses. And so we're skipping out of Exodus now because they have the receiving of the Ten Commandments, the building of the tabernacle, and the consecration of the priesthood. And so we're going to skip to where now they are leaving from Mount Sinai. They traveled for a few days, and we're looking at how Moses was faithful over his house. And I think there's some principles that we can learn about faithfulness from the life of Moses, because he's called faithful by the Lord. And so there are two events here in Numbers chapter 11 and 12 that we're going to look at. And this is, once again, the people of Israel complaining, and Moses doesn't respond very well to the complaining. And then you have Miriam and Aaron are airing their grievances against Moses, and Moses actually handles that one in the right way. And so that's what we'll be looking at tonight. I think some good principles that we can learn from this. And so up to this point, in this passage, God has been providing for them. God has been protecting them. They now have a tabernacle that's been built. They have a priesthood that has been appointed and consecrated. They've been given by the law, by God. And so God has just been with them every step of the way, helping them, guiding them, providing for them, protecting them. And it's just been God and seeing how gracious and kind he's been to the people. But unfortunately, the people's perspective is not that God has been watching out for them and taking care of them and protecting them. They actually think that God has failed in doing so. And so we have the first complaint in chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So the name of that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. So it's interesting, when we think of misfortune, we think of, oh, something bad happened to them. And it's not that God did anything wrong or bad, but the idea of misfortune, it refers to a poor quality of life. In other words, the people of Israel are looking at their circumstances, and what they're saying is, we should have this standard of living. God should be taking care of us in this way. But what God's actually doing, as far as we are concerned, is subpar. It's not good enough. And so they complain that God is not good to them, but that everything is wrong. And so what God does is he's angry with them. He sends fire, and it destroys those on the outside of the camp. And it's interesting in this is that why does Moses point out that those on the outside were the ones who were consumed by the fire? Well, there was a lot of people who were complaining, so definitely they were guilty. God would not have done that to them if they were not guilty. But how about this? Maybe what the picture is giving to us, that these were people that were complaining about God, but they were not actually walking close with the Lord. They were far away from the center of the camp, because if you remember, when it came time to the tabernacle to move, it would lead them, but when they would set up camp, the tribes would surround the tabernacle. The tabernacle would be in the middle, and the 12 tribes, there's 3 tribes on each side, and Levi was dispersed among them as far as their tribe as priests. And I think what you find here is that probably the reason why there was ingratitude and complaining, it was saying something about the people's walk with God, not saying that there's anything wrong with God. And so God was angry. And so what is Moses' response? He prays to God, interceding on behalf of the people. The second complaint is in verse 4 through verse 9. Now the rabble, and when we're talking about rabble, is a group of people that have banded together. So these are people who are banded together. The rabble that was among them had a strong craving. And the people of Israel also wept again and said, "Oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at." Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of bdellium. The people went about and gathered it and ground it in hand mills, or beat it in mortars, and boiled it in pots and made cakes of it. And the taste of it was like the taste of cakes baked with oil. When the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell with it. Moses heard the people weeping throughout their clans, everyone at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. So what happens at this point is that the people are complaining, and it's interesting what's pointed out, that you have the people of Israel weeping and complaining, but it's introduced by there's these band of people. So probably they were the ones who were complaining, and what oftentimes happens when there's complaining, it spreads to others, and others begin to complain as well. And so I think that's what he's making reference to. And they have a very strong desire for the things that were in Egypt. And they weren't desiring of the manna, which God had been providing for them. It's interesting, the perspective of the people. They said, look at what we had in Egypt, all these things. And it's interesting, it cost us nothing. Yeah, it didn't cost them anything because they were in slavery and they were probably given food to eat. But the only reason they were given food is so they could get some work done. But what was life like for them in Egypt, even though they had this food given to them without them having to pay for it? Really, really hard. And they tend to forget how difficult life was like in Egypt. And so they're complaining. And so God was angry with the people for this very thing. But that leads now to Moses complaining. And in verse 10, Moses heard the people weeping throughout their clans, everyone at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. So he's not displeased with the Lord. He is partly displeased with the Lord, but he's also displeased with the people. And I think that the complaining has taken a toll on Moses. And here's what he has to say. Verse 11, Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant?" So in other words, I am serving you. Why are you letting me be treated so badly? Why are you treating me so badly? And why have I not found favor in your sight that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child to the land that you swore to give their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to this people? For they weep before me and say, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once, if I find favor in your sight, that I might not see my wretchedness. So when we think about Moses being displeased, I think it's kind of maybe a little bit of an understatement. Because he basically says, God, you treated me badly. You're overloading me with all these people, and I can't do the job. It's too big. And so with all that is going on, the best thing for you to do, God, is to just take my life now. Kill me. So that way I don't have to deal with all these problems, and I don't have to deal with my own wretchedness. And so he actually is asking God to take his life. even faithful men as Moses can sin. Even faithful people can sin against God. Now, Moses was much more faithful than what we see at this point, and God calls him faithful not because he was perfect, but because he was consistently, loyally obedient to the Lord. But even a godly man can sin against God. And I think for Moses, everything about the people of Israel, the job that he was doing, was being so heavy upon him now that he's blaming God for this and what he's going through. And he's ready to quit. He just wants to give up. But this is where the Lord is gracious to Moses. And what he actually does is provide 70 elders to help Moses with the people. And what happens then at that point is that these other people, now God is using them, and they're speaking on God's behalf. They're prophesying. 2 people come to Moses and say to them, you need to stop these other 70 people from prophesying. You're the leader. You're the prophet. And so Joshua says, yeah, Moses, you command these people to stop. But Moses actually is not jealous. Instead, he says to the people, we ought to be glad that God is using other people to be able to serve him. And so, he realizes that there's nothing special about himself, but that God can use other people as well. What a turnaround for Moses, from the complaining to where he is now. And this is going to continue where you see Moses' humility in chapter 12. But in between then, God provides food for the people of Israel. They want meat. They're sick of the manna. So God provides quail for them. And so they got what they wanted. They got meat. But interestingly, that the rabble, the bands of the people who initiated all the complaining and everything, as they're eating the quail, as they're chewing on the quail, they die. God takes their life. As you get into chapter 12, you now have Aaron and Miriam complaining. And in chapter 12, beginning in verse 1, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married. For he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, come out, you 3, to the tent of meeting. And the 3 of them came out. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth clearly and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous like snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us, because we have done foolishly and have sinned. So what's happening here is you have Moses married a Cushite woman. A Cushite, the people of Cushite would be the people who reside in Ethiopia. So we would talk about this as an Ethiopian woman. What we do not know is, did he marry a second wife? Did his first wife, Zipporah, die? Because Zipporah's father was a Midianite, probably it's not Zipporah that's being spoken of here. We don't know what's going on, but it becomes the basis for Aaron and Miriam to say, why are you the only leader? Why are you, what makes you so special to be the leader of the people. So probably the Cushite woman was more of a pretext. It kind of opened the door for them as a way to air what is their true grievance against Moses. And so they really wanted Moses' position. They wanted Moses' fame, if you want to say. And what's interesting about this, what is the relationship of Miriam and Aaron to Moses? Their family, brothers and sisters. And so here's his brothers and sisters complaining against him. And of course, God was angry about this. And what God also does is that God backs Moses as his chosen leader. What's interesting is there's only one of the two, between Moses and Aaron, only Miriam is struck with leprosy. Nothing happens to Aaron. But Aaron is complaining as well. And I think the reason for that is that she was probably the instigator. She was probably the chief person in this. And she brought Aaron along and said, hey, we need to go talk to Moses. Because I think Aaron shared some of the same beliefs as Miriam did. The other thing I find interesting, why did God strike Miriam with leprosy? Could it be because leprosy consumes a person and kills them? So can envy and complaining consume every part of a person and in essence destroy it? Now, I think the answer to that is yes. So, interestingly, Moses prays to God and asks God to heal Miriam. But what's fascinating here is the statement about Moses. Why in the middle of the people who are prophesying, and Moses says, that's okay, God's using them. And then them saying, we don't want you to be the only leader, Moses. Who died and made you, judge and leader and king? And so the word for meek is actually the word for poor and needy. So Moses was humble. He was poor. He saw himself as someone who was poor and needy. And I think Moses isn't gloating. He's not saying, look at what kind of individual I am, how great I am. I'm just the most humble person in the whole wide world. But I think what you have going on here is what Moses is stating is this. You're right. There's nothing special about me. There's nothing worthy about me. God, by his grace, chose me to be a leader. But there's nothing about me that makes me great, that makes me worthy, where God had to choose me and make me the leader of the people. And that's the attitude that I think in part that shows why Moses was a faithful individual, is that Moses did not try to accumulate the power for himself, nor saw himself as being the most important person. He was humble. And he basically admits to Miriam and to Aaron, there is nothing special about me. I'm not chosen because there's something good that God saw in me where he has to have me. It is just the grace of God. So what do we learn from the passage of Scripture? What can we learn from all of this? I think there's several lessons. Is that anyone can fall into sin. Even faithful people can fall into sin. I think the other thing we learn from this, complaining and ingratitude are serious sins. They're destructive sins. I think sometimes we look at ingratitude, we don't see it as being a very serious sin. It's bad, but it's not that bad. And I think what we see here is that it is actually a very serious matter. What we do find also about complaining and ingratitude, that it's indicative of a person's relationship with God. So we saw the people on the outside of the camp were the ones who were struck by the fire. And I think even when you look at Moses, while he was faithful, his relationship with God, when he complained to God and blamed him, was not good. Moses recovered. He got things corrected. But it was indicative of a person's relationship with God. As we also look at the passage of Scripture, I think the lesson we learn about Moses is Moses was truly a humble individual. Even though the people of Israel many times complained about him, wanted to have him replaced, wanted him to be gone, yet he realized, I'm not a special person, but God has me here. God is the one who made the choice. And he prays for the people. He intercedes for the people, even though they have complained and wanted him to be gone. And so you see the humility of Moses, and I think it's a great lesson for all of us, is this: God doesn't need us. God can do his work without any one of us. But it's God by his grace that allows us to serve him. And for that, we ought to be grateful. So just some good lessons I think we can learn from this passage of Scripture. Any questions or anything that stands out to you in the passage? Yes?
There's a couple things. One, with Moses complaining, I think a lot of, and I agree it was sin, but I think a lot of that was due because he was overwhelmed with the responsibility, and God provided other people to be a relief to him. And and so Moses saw that was a good, thing. And going back to Aaron and Miriam, I've always wondered why Aaron didn't get leprosy as well. But he was the high priest, and it was the priests that were supposed to, according to the law, determine if somebody was leprosy free. So I was wondering if maybe God didn't give leprosy to him because he was really the priest.
No, I think the reason for it is Miriam was the instigator. I think when Aaron saw it, he repented pretty quickly at that point. But I think it's because Miriam was the instigator of it. That's kind of my opinion. I think there could be other opinions on that are valid. But that's kind of what I see in the text of Scripture. And so, as far as being overwhelmed, he already received the advice, and he did. He appointed judges over more individuals. And God has them more. But I also think that when God calls you to do something, God also makes you capable. But I think that he does. He feels a sense of being overwhelmed that he can't do the job and handle it. And it's because one thing after another, after another, after another. And could it be that because Moses' relationship with God was not right to where he's blaming God, could it be that in the sense of being overwhelmed, his walk with God was suffering? He wasn't spending the time with God that he should. And so I liken it this way, is many times when life is going hard, what are usually two things that we stop doing because life is so hard?
Reading the Bible.
We stop praying and we stop reading our Bible. And actually, that's when we need to be reading it and praying it all the more. And so I think that God was gracious to him. And yes, he did need some help. But I think there's something more that was happening with Moses, to come to a point and say, take my life. Something really, it's not that it's the degree of his displeasure with God and displeasure with the circumstances was pretty severe.
Yeah, I think, part of what you hear in Moses, what he's saying is, God, you gave me the ministry to deal with these, to serve these people, and I'm doing it, and they're just like the most difficult people. Why did you give me these difficult people to deal with,
Yeah, this isn't the first time with Moses. You remember when God first approached him, I can't speak, I can't do that, and God says, no, I will make you capable.
He's human.
So yeah, I think he's human, and so maybe this may be the weakness of Moses, because when God called him, he had those things that he was saying, and you see the sense of being overwhelmed. So maybe this is part of the burden that he carries. But I tend to think that there's something going on with his relationship with God that's pretty severe at this point.
Well, and I agree with that. I'm not negating what that aspect of being.
Yeah. So good question. Good thing to think about in the passage. All right.